So first of all, happy May Day, International Workers' Day, and appreciate um, all of you from Europe who have the day off today joining us. So the first thing I want to talk about is really, or the only thing I want to talk about is really getting into this P word, as I've called it, and you'll note from that some reticence in using even the word itself, purpose, because my view is that purpose has become somewhat devalued, but that doesn't mean that it lacks value. So what we've been doing at Fortitude is thinking about how we make that meaningful, how we address some of the world's most pressing issues in relation to social and environmental impact, and specifically the role that big business can play in that, because it can play a big role, positive or negative, and we, of course, try to nudge it much with positive. Just a word about who we are. So we are Fortitude Partners. We've been going for 5 years. We're based in London. Most of our work is in continental Europe and the US, and we tend to work with pretty big organizations who have defined a purpose and are on their way to becoming much more sustainable and responsible companies. And really, we have made it our mission to look at sustainable, responsible business as an engine of growth, as a game-changing platform for value creation, as a way to spark innovation, improve reputation, attract customers, build purposeful cultures and organizations. So that's really very much how we see it. How do we make sustainable, responsible business mainstream business? And I'll talk some more about that in the coming slides. So the three things I want to talk about is just very briefly, what's my view of where the P word is today? Think about how we can use a new definition of purpose to do something meaningful. And then ultimately, as an organization or as a brand, to do something that makes a really big, disproportionate, exponential impact, a positive impact upon the world. So if you think about it, purpose is not really a particularly new concept. People have always been drawn to purpose, particularly if you think about any of the great leaders who've achieved anything. They've been driven by a conviction, by an integrity, by an authenticity. They're motivated by a calling to do something that transcends the everyday, that changes something. So it's not really a new concept in relation to, let's say, political leaders, but it is, or leaders in civil society, but it's a relatively new concept when it applies to business. And my view is that it matters more today than ever, because we're living in very, very uncertain times. You know, even before the whole COVID-19 crisis came along, the pressures that we are facing as a species, environmentally and socially, are immense, and radical change is needed to make that happen. And the only way, as you can see from leaders who have changed things in society, is to look to purpose, is to look to that idea of, you know, why do we exist, and how does that transcend the everyday to change behavior and to change the world. So it really, really matters in business. And you can see that with, say, a client of ours, Unilever, whose brands with purpose, as they call them, are growing 50% faster than the rest of their portfolio. So there's a commercial aspect to this as well. And that, for us, really is where the magic lies, is where you can get positive impact, but that also drives commercial success. And I think it matters more today as well, is because people are losing trust, and have done for the last couple of decades, in institutions, you know, whether those are banks, governments, even with NGOs and IGOs, people are losing trust in those institutions. So business and brands have come in to fill that gap, where people start to trust them. So therefore, there's both an opportunity, but also a responsibility for businesses to act with purpose. But the problem that we have with it, and we very seldom use this P word, is that it has become misappropriated because of the power of purpose. Um, it has been misappropriated largely by marketers. And, you know, as John said, I was a marketer. I guess I am in some way still, for 15 years or so. And I've used a lot of these tricks and tools. One of the more famous ones that I hear clients of ours refer to is Simon Sinek, um, who has this idea, which is a compelling and it's an intriguing and enticing idea that, you know, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And there's a truth in that. Um, you can see it. One of the ones that I like, if we talk about corporate purpose, is IKEA. IKEA are doing wonderful things when it comes to their supply chain and becoming more responsible and minimizing environmental impact. And you can see that their purpose comes from a real sense of conviction from their founders to democratize design, to create a better everyday life, to make good design at home affordable for lots of people. There's lots of things that are wrong with IKEA, but you can see that there's an authenticity to this purpose. But taken to its extreme, purpose has become completely corrupted. This is one that came out about a month ago from British American Tobacco, and it's just not credible. Given what they do, their purpose is to build a better tomorrow. Really? I don't think anyone really believes that whatsoever. So it's purely a veneer that's been placed on top of an organization that is making a very negative impact upon the world, to make them somewhat respectable, and it doesn't work. But in some ways, I think even more insidious than the more, this is obviously untrue, but more insidious are purpose statements like Starbucks, which again simply just don't really ring true. It's not the business they're in, really. You can, of course, disagree with this. Lots of people love Starbucks, but there's lots of very, very negative aspects of Starbucks. You know, how they've taken over independent coffee retailers, their treatment of suppliers, their misappropriation of national brands like Ethiopian coffee, without paying their fair dues. So again, this is a bit of a veneer, maybe to make their leaders feel a bit better, inspire their people, get some of the benefits of purpose there. So it's really overall become a somewhat devalued concept. So the first of three lessons, or bits of advice, for what it's worth, that I would offer is that when it comes to purpose, you need to get real. You need to focus on authenticity. You need to think about the aspect of your purpose that is true, that's authentic, that is credible. Most importantly, though, it needs to be about doing something meaningful. And we see that today, you know, across the world. Organizations who are doing something with some social utility, that do something useful, are rewarded. It's very, very simple, but goes against the instincts of big corporations. Now, if you want to do something meaningful, a lot of big businesses over the last decade have resorted to CSR, corporate social responsibility, which means doing good, giving back, philanthropic activity, and that's all good. But it's disconnected from the core of the business, and therefore it remains small, it remains discretionary. It has that aspect of being a veneer to cover up some of the bad deeds that the company is doing, and really that doesn't cut it. So if you want to do something meaningful, a good place to start is the UN list of goals for sustainable development, launched about 5 years ago, which list out really, I guess you could call this the world's to-do list. And these are the big problems globally that business specifically needs to address. Business came together and agreed upon these, and lots of businesses that we work with are implementing all or some of these in one way or another, to attempt to use their capital, their influence, to make progress on one or usually several of these goals, using their business activities, their brands, their capital, their reach, their distribution, to make a positive impact. Now, These are daunting. These are big problems like poverty, decent work and economic growth, gender equality. And you see that they broadly cover two areas of society on one hand and environment on the other. And that's what we talk about when we talk about sustainable, responsible business, environment and society. Now, given that these are quite daunting, um, it can be difficult for businesses to begin the journey. But when we talk to our clients, we see many, many reasons for them to be optimistic about their chances of doing something useful here. And the first of those reasons is really consumers want this, whether they are potential employees who want to work for organizations who are doing something positive to society, or whether they're consumers who will sample a brand or reject a brand or boycott a brand based on its contribution to an environmental or societal issue. And you see citizens, whether it's Greta or movements like the flight shaming movement, where people who boast on Instagram about all of the international trips they've done then get shamed because flying, as I'll talk about this in a bit more detail later, has a massively negative environmental impact, although none of us are doing any of that at the moment. Technology is a massive reason for optimism. The technological advances in terms of moving towards clean meat or meat alternatives to minimize the environmental impact that animal-based protein has on the world, the investment in renewable energy, aspects of gene editing to help feed a growing population in the world, the technology and information technology, biotech, and many, many other fields is enormous, and businesses are seeing the opportunity within this to solve some of the world's most pressing issues. And then especially over the last 5 years, and we see this really, to be quite honest, accelerating exponentially, the extent to which businesses are willing to reorientate their purpose statement, but also their activities, their allocation of capital, is very, very encouraging. Whether it's in Davos at the beginning of this year, redefining the universal purpose of a company, whether it's the Business Roundtable, the most blue chip corporate America coalition of big corporate America, coming together to redefine the purpose of a company away from being only to serve its shareholders to serving a broader range of stakeholders, including their employees, society as a whole. Frameworks like the B corporations, a new way of incorporating a business so that it serves a dual purpose of shareholders and positive impact on the world, are all really coming together to create this momentum that is very, very encouraging. And I think perhaps for us, and this may seem a little unusual dropping this in a Creative Mornings, but one of the ones that gets us most excited is the way in which investors are reallocating capital and judging their investments based on a range of what they call ESG, environment, social, and governance aspects of how the company is run, to exclude, on a very basic level, companies who don't meet that criteria, but also invest more in companies who are meeting good ESG criteria. And BlackRock is the biggest asset manager in the world. And for the last 2 years, their chief executive has written to the chief executives of the companies that they invest in to really put some pressure upon them to act in a environmentally responsible way. You're seeing things like a coalition of organizations and chief executives with a market valuation of $40 trillion, which is more than the GDP of the US and China combined, committing to climate targets. So when investors allocate their capital, that makes companies sit up and listen and act. So unsurprisingly, you're starting to see businesses going all in with creativity, energy, and an ambition to make a massive positive impact. And you can characterize these in lots of different ways, but all of them look to sustainable and responsible business, not as a set of obligations, but as a source book of opportunity to innovate, to bring new products to market, to attract new customers, to reposition brands, and ultimately make a positive impact, whether it's Tesla leading the way and forcing the rest of the automotive industry to adopt electric vehicles, or Impossible Meats, who are using technology to kind of take the middle man, the animal, out of protein creation, which has a very, very positive environmental outcome. So to characterize these big companies like H&M, again, issues with consumerism, disposable fashion, but because of the scale of H&M, they can influence the whole supply chain, let's say in cotton or recyclable materials or reusable clothing. You have the system changers, so I mentioned Impossible earlier, who have made it their whole purpose, their whole mission to change the way we create protein, and because they recognize the very, very negative impact that getting our meat from cows and chickens has. So they've created an alternative product which is getting great traction. And you have brands who are quite simply using their influence to be activists and to use their company in innovative ways to make the world a better place. You have campaigners like Dove, who for the last 15 years have been looking at how they can bring on board and change the way women, and then subsequently younger women, think about their self-image, their body image, and how they portray themselves, for example, with young women on social media. You got others who are more tactical, so they haven't really integrated the whole purpose concept, but they are collaborating. So with Burger King and Impossible, or White Castle and Impossible, starting to mainstream alternative meats. You got the innovators. So Nike, we think, are again previously much maligned in terms of their human rights, but they're using innovation to transform their business, develop new products like Flyknit, fly leather, grind surfaces, that allow them to create a more innovative products and have a positive environmental impact. And you've got game changers. So there's a dairy in New York, after 92 years, switched away for environmental reasons from creating to create a plant-based milk. And then finally, with REI, the US outdoor company, creating a movement to react against consumerism, where they closed all of their stores on Black Friday, one of the biggest trading days in the calendar. So the second lesson I would offer is to be useful. But being useful requires that you find your focus. And that requires linking the problem, finding a problem, first of all, that's substantial, and then linking that problem to your business model. And I'll just do one that's from a recent client that we worked with in travel and tourism. If you think about the impact of travel and tourism, it is absolutely massive. On the environmental side, tourism contributes 8% of global emissions, most of it from air travel, and then it also affects other natural resources. So the problems that the industry creates are huge and therefore worth addressing. And on the social side, the numbers are quite frankly staggering. 10% of global GDP comes from travel and tourism, 10% of total employment. The impact upon communities and upon societies that we visit is enormous. So again, there's lots and lots of scope for the travel and tourism industry to make a positive change. So if we were to think this through with a travel company, how could the travel industry make a difference? And there's lots and lots of ways. So the first starting point is that we know that consumers are interested in sustainability. They want to travel more sustainable. So therefore there's an opportunity for a travel agency, for example, or an online travel portal to provide advice, booking references, dashboards, and so on. You can take a very direct way, looking at different ways to make a positive impact through the hotel stay. So that could be with Kind Traveler, where you can do more than travel. You can have this impact tourism. You can donate to charity and get a hotel discount. So you start to link those two. But that's not really particularly mainstream. What you are starting to see that's mainstream is other modes of travel, whether it's car sharing or taking to the train, and a recognition that people are willing to adapt their travel plans to benefit the environment. There is opportunity. There is opportunity for a travel company to make a positive difference. Again, you also see in terms of technology, where technologies can enable sustainable travel. Google have, a few months ago, unveiled green maps to encourage low carbon travel. So the route that you choose, the mode that you choose, can have a carbon impact. You see regions starting to promote values-based tourism, where they can recognize that everyone is welcome. You got hotels who are tapping into trends like, meat-free or vegan hotel rooms, or more environmentally conscious hotels. And if you're a travel guide, you can also help support local communities. So what this all starts to show is that if you take this problem seriously and you're innovative and are able to understand the consumer trends, then you can start to deliver upon a purpose that is not just some veneer around the company, but through tapping into social and environmental responsibility and making a part of the business model, innovating, whether it's customer proposition or technology, that you can actually start to use it to drive value in the business and make a positive impact at the same time. So the third lesson really is, if you want to have a purpose that has a meaningful impact, then make it core to the business so that you start to have an exponential impact, so that you can reinvest in that initiative and make it really core to the value generating heart of the business. So those are the three things that I really wanted to say about purpose. One, make sure it's real, authentic, credible, that it speaks to your values, that you've got a history of doing it. Make sure that you're addressing something that is actually useful, not just CSR, but you're addressing a real, meaningful problem, and then integrate it into the core of your business, into your innovation, your product design, how you recruit, how you run the company, the policies that you put in place for your people, the customer propositions that you develop. And that is, I think, all from me.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Sean. I have a question, if that's all right, just to kind of kick off, if anybody's just shy. But do you think that a company's purpose can change and should change? I think with what's going on in the world at the minute, there are some companies and brands who would have had their purpose of probably set in stone, and what's happening now in the world today has probably completely knocked that off kilt. So do you think that it's a kind of continuum where it changes continuously, or should a company kind of set their purpose in stone and stick to it?
So, as is often the case, Groucho Marx had the answer to this. And his answer, well, his joke he made, he said, "Sir, I have my principles, and if you do not like my principles, I have others." and what that kind of shows is purpose is kind of like principles. It's your beliefs. It's who you are. Yes, they evolve. You think about us as people; they evolve over time. You may lose them. You may strengthen them.
Yeah.
But they're not something that they're not a campaign. And that's I think where marketing has kind of corrupted this whole concept. It's not a campaign. It's something that is fundamentally part of your DNA, of your belief system, of your values system. So they don't change very often. You may express them differently, and certainly the activities that you do to live that purpose should change. But purpose is something that is pretty permanent, and the best ones like that IKEA one that I mentioned really come from the origins of the company. You know, why Ingvar Kamprad, the I and the K of IKEA, set up his business. You know, it's evolved, it's, you know, somewhat weakened, it's somewhat strengthened, but it really comes from a fundamental truth. So that authenticity and integrity are really, really important.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, we've got a question here from Leila Collins. Leila says, how would you engage with a small, maybe local company who doesn't understand how their purpose or brand could benefit them given their size?
In some ways, I think it's easier for smaller companies because they're often still managed by a founder, and the founder has set up that company for a reason. They want to do things in their particular way. So I think the lessons are pretty much the same, and implementing it is much easier if they're small. All those big companies that we work for were once small companies, and some have grown. You know, you think of Impossible Foods, you know, it was a tiny company not that long ago. And so you do see this very rapid growth in companies, but I think it's the lessons are equally valid for small companies. And I think all of us, you know, small companies need to recruit people, they need to motivate people, they need to compete against big companies for talent. So if they're not doing something that is meaningful and purposeful, then they're putting themselves at a disadvantage when it comes to recruitment, when it comes to speaking to their customers, to their employees. You know, we are a small company, and we've thought, and it's hard. It's really hard to do this for yourself, like to think about how do we articulate our purpose? Like, why are we here? More than and what would the world be like if we weren't here? So it does require, with big or small companies, a lot of thinking, a lot of introspection, a lot of challenging, a lot of kind of soak time and letting it settle, and checking that it's not just marketing, that it is actually a statement of belief. So I think the lessons are equally valid for big and small companies.
Very good. I think yes. Okay. So Jessica has a question as well. So COVID-19 obviously has devastating effects, but interestingly has been able to accelerate corporate momentum to do things to benefit the environment. Does that feel frustrating? A joke I saw that environmentalism needed COVID-19 PR rep. Why did it take something like this to get beyond greenwashing? Oh, that's a great question.
So I think the reason for that is down to the way our brain works. We react to things that are immediate. So threats like climate change, as much as they've been dramatized, they still feel quite distant. You don't wake up in the morning and the climate has changed. With something like COVID-19, you do wake up in the morning and lots more people have died, or things have happened in your immediate environment. And I think that's one of the shortcomings of the human brain. You think about the way countries and companies react to terrorist threats, it's completely disproportionate if you really just think about it and think about the numbers. You know, so a comparison between what the US spend on the CDC versus the national defense budget, and that's true for all countries, versus the threat. The number of deaths in the US has surpassed the total number in the Vietnam. So we react in a disproportionate way. We allocate resources in the wrong way. So I think that's why it's happened. Having said that, I think it could be, I'm not certain, could be a real positive that businesses have realized that they can mobilize for positive societal impact. And the companies that are doing this best are doing it in quite a humble way that doesn't look self-serving, even though it might serve them in the long run, to do something useful. to demonstrate their social utility. And hopefully that idea of social utility for companies will be one of the ideas that sticks from this whole crisis.
Cool. And then we have one more question from Willie Stewart. So, how much of a balance must be struck between implementing CSR without alienating core market? For example, British Airways hypothetically implemented a shift to cleaner travel and sustainable travel, which met well with an external audience, but didn't resonate with core business travelers. Would this shift in tone be counterproductive to profit generation, which would be a core objective of most organizations?
It can be. I mean, all the airline industry is a difficult one because of the massive impact. You know, you can drive from one end of the country to the other, or for a year versus flying from one end of the country or doing an international. So the carbon impact of travel is absolutely, reducing the impact of travel can be also enormous. If you look at, we did an analysis of the fleet of BA, and they're one of the least efficient fleets. So if you really want to reduce your carbon impact but still want to fly, you should probably fly Norwegian or Ryanair. EasyJet's pretty decent too. But they pack more people into the same tube, and their fleet is much newer. BA is, I think, the worst in the world, actually.
Wow.
In terms of their impact. But if they can start to nudge away at that, and I think it's a factor of about almost double. So you can have your carbon impact per flight.
Oh, what a way to kick them when they're down, Sean.
Well, I mean, the reality is, though, some of these businesses deserve to feel. They don't deserve to be propped up, and it's not. Yeah, it's not our job. It's not a government's job to prop up companies that are, and often this comes down to efficiency, which drives profitability, which drives carbon impacts. So I think we should be a bit less sentimental about some of these brands. I'm not suggesting that that's what he was being at all, but I do think that sometimes you alienate some customers and sometimes you gain others, and that's where the value of purpose and conviction really comes.
Yeah. Amen.
Basically, firstly, thanks a million. Really, really loving this talk. Been working with a number of companies actually who've all of a sudden really clattered, and they're running for creative thinking and a bit of development on their companies are looking at them within themselves to see, with a bit of downtime, let's look at what our purpose and our vision is. This could be a time for change, and therefore they're starting to I was in a meeting the other day, and they're starting to grab lots of other people's purposes and visions and try to adapt them to themselves to feel as if they can fit into this new world that we're entering into. And I think as a creative, we have a responsibility to turn around and tell them the truth and say, call them out on their BS, so to speak. But it's a fine line between kind of keeping bread on the table and kind of I suppose walking through this. Do you have any advice for those kind of situations? You seem to have you've come up with a few bits there already, I suppose.
I mean, there's loads of models for this. Your Simon Sinek one is I'm not knocking that completely. It's a good place to start. The one that we use is really simple. It's basically, you ask two questions. What's the change we want to see in the world? And what will be our contribution, our credible contribution? Which needs to look, whether you're if you make dog food or you're a hairdresser or something, it needs to be credible in that particular sector that you work in, given your scale and size and all of that. But the first question is what is the change we would like to see in the world? How might we make the world a better place? And that it does require a lot of conversations and structured conversations, but for us anyway. The way that we find best to get to that a credible answer around purpose. It also shouldn't, and this is where, if it damages the business, then it won't work. I mean, it's really simple. We did a bit of work with the guy who is now chief executive of Unilever, and Glaswegian guy, and he's quite plain speaking. And he said this thing really, it was kind of really obvious and really simple, really resonated, which is, if it doesn't benefit the business, it's not sustainable. So in other words, anything that they were doing with our range of brands, it needs to attract customers or help the brand innovate or come to new formulations or influence, say, one of their distributor partners or supermarkets. So you need to and that's where it'd be very easy for any company to dream up something that, here's how we want to make the world a better place. Well, that's very nice. But how is it going to benefit our business? And it's that tension between those two things is really where the work comes in, of trying to find that sweet spot between benefit to the wider world and benefit to the business. And if they're not connected to one another, then at very best, it will be the benefit to the world will be small scale. It will be CSR, really. Going out, giving a bit to charity, letting your employees off for a day to go and paint the wall somewhere, and that's all to the good, but it's not really what we're talking about.
Yeah, no, I just think, like, in a broader perspective, I think we should adopt a new economic system based on fair share of the wealth. And I think based on that, we can avoid a lot of other problems, such as environmental problems or abusive exploitation of the workforce in general. And think about everyone that is in this planet, and not casting anything aside. But that's just just a comment. I was not really asking for.
It's a great comment. It's a really great comment, and it's this whole a new definition of capitalism. I think is something that a new type of capitalism. I think is one of the areas that's emergent. I wouldn't call it mainstream at all. But it is definitely on the agenda of boardrooms. But that's why I mentioned shareholders particularly. And the reason why shareholders, again, everyone has vested interests, and that's okay. We try to work with those vested interests. The responsibility of an asset manager like BlackRock is to invest its clients' money, and its clients are generally pension funds. So we're all hopefully putting money into a pension fund, but that we want to draw on in 20, 30, 40 years from now. So they're looking at the very long-term trajectory of the investments that they make, which is why they're putting pressure on companies to think about a more holistic way, a broader definition of purpose, where they're not just making quarterly dividend payments to their investors, but they're actually thinking about how they might address issues of climate change, of good governance, of human rights, etc. So it's basically, the way they're seeing it is that it's good business. And that is, I think it's very, very strong, because I think the capitalist system is almost fundamentally inherently part of our human psyche. We are kind of made to trade. But the way it has been exploited since the early 80s, the way it has been interpreted since the early 80s as kind of unrestrained growth and unrestrained consumerism just doesn't work. We've reached planetary boundaries. We can't consume anymore. We need to look for new models. So at the investor level, that's where I think you would get the most leverage, the most pressure. At a company level, they're also thinking about, like IKEA a couple of years ago, their chief sustainability officer issued this idea around, based on the idea of peak oil, which of course we're totally at the moment. He talked about peak curtains. Basically, we all live in smaller and smaller apartments, and we don't have any room to buy any of this stuff. So it's really simple. So if our customers don't need our stuff anymore, what are we going to sell? And that's where they got into more circular models about borrowing, around swapping, and then how can we make money from that as IKEA? So it's just an exploration. That IKEA's model is basically the equivalent of fast fashion. So how can you just like keep pushing this stuff out? Can we look at circular models where we take back some of the product, we upcycle the product, we look at leasing schemes and so on, and try to get a different model of both capitalism and consumerism. Awesome. Great comment.
I think the situation puts capitalism overall in a I don't know how to word it, but in a phase of it's being tested, and we already see the weaknesses of how the system actually is. And you were mentioning about investors trying to maybe cope with the situation. So there's surely some good things happening. What I'd like to see is a more impacts on everything that is, makes the society work. And just to see how this can be for our benefit and not for just the company's benefits in that sense.
Yeah, and my fear, sorry, just to make one more comment on that, because it's a very interesting theme. My fear in all of that is that we're in this kind of experiment of stopping consumerist society. The results of that experiment are very unpromising, very negative. And that my real fear is that it's really highlighted as in dramatized if we stop consumerism, if we stop growth coming from consuming product, then it has very negative economic consequences, which of course affect the poorest first. So I hope that we can find a way to interpret those results in a different way.
No, I think we just need to find those to provide those better definitions of what consumerism should be about, and the kind of products or services that are more sustainably acceptable. I think if we have to repurpose, we're talking about purpose, so we have to repurpose everything. So then we see what can create a better economy based on that, and how that benefits everybody, rather than just whoever is ruling us.
Totally. So Sean, Ashley has a question coming in hot from Amsterdam.
My question just was more around, ironically, it feels like marketing has tried to promote this sense of purpose with so much terminology, call it CSR, purpose, social impact, mission, vision. There's perhaps this sense of fatigue or overuse of this rhetoric that maybe impacts people's understanding of the value of defining purpose. Do you have any thoughts on how we might reposition or even remarket or reframe this?
I totally agree with it. It has become devalued, to the extent that we don't really talk about purpose because it's just misinterpreted. Similarly, a couple of years ago, we didn't really talk about sustainability because it was interpreted as like CSR, giving back, philanthropy. Whereas really what we're talking about is what we would like to promote and do with our clients is how can they understand their role in the world, make a positive contribution to society, and then use that to transform their business model and drive innovation and kind of attract customers, build good customer brands. I think that's the way that we've chosen to do that is by demonstrating that social and environmental responsibility drive results for the company.
Yeah,
it's partly why we're not generally involved in that. We don't discuss with companies a new form of capitalism because it's just too big. The area of expertise we have is helping companies to define their role in the world and work out how they may activate that in a few specific areas. But if you can demonstrate that it drives value for the business, then because that business is about value creation at the moment, operating in a capitalist system, that's the way to that for us is the way to show is something useful, that it's not just veneer. There are lots of other ways you could go this political route, some of our partners do, as well. But yeah, I think, I mean, the problem with marketing, people getting their hands on something that, you know, helps build attractive brands, that creates a Dove, for example. They all try to do a Dove, and Dove spent 15 years doing that. They seriously invest in it. It has a positive impact. They're still about selling, you know, soap and moisturizing cream and shower gel. You know, they sell it in plastic containers, so no one's perfect, and that's okay. So yeah, sorry. Hopefully, an answer to your question, that we try to do it by demonstrating that it's useful. Again,
yeah, I think there's this challenge of actually just reframing this whole concept of value. So, you know, a decade ago, value was always seen as profit and shareholder dividend and growth. It feels like now we're at this cusp of how can we redefine value? Yeah, within a capitalist, consumerist paradigm, but there is this opportunity to reframe it as to, you know, some of the ratings that you mentioned earlier, the sense of positive impact. I think it's exciting, but obviously with a sense of cautious optimism as to how we can evolve from this.
Yeah, there remain many risks.
Look, just to kind of wrap up on this, just to say thank you. First of all, thank you to Sean. First and foremost, Sean, that was awesome. Really, really, really insightful, and great to hear that, you know, so many people had questions as well afterwards. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk us through your thoughts on purpose. So thank you very much. I'm sure everybody will agree. It was awesome. So cheers, dude. Really appreciate that.
Yep. Thank you. Really enjoyed it. It's my first Creative Mornings too. So hopefully the first of many.